call the Regional Planning Commission meeting Wednesday, October 10th to order. Kevin, since you carried that in, would you lead us in the pledges?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, we need a roll call first. We stand and we can do a roll call.
Sarah Trevilicek. Here. John Marshall for Peter Gower.
Here.
James Barnes.
Here.
Larry Chesney.
Here.
James Fewens.
Here.
Ed Hawkins.
Here.
Frank Peterson.
Here.
Diane Vanderwell.
Here.
And Kevin Weisky.
Here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. We have lots going on the county complex apparently tonight. So we're now at item 3, a motion to approve the agenda, please.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion for the approval of the minutes.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to approve the minutes as read if there's no corrections.
Is there a second?
1 second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Peterson and seconded by Commissioner Chesney to approve the minutes as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
I have to abstain.
Sting.
Okay. Did you catch both of them? Yes. We're now at public comment. I have one public comment card from Tannehill still, and kind of right up here. Pick a chair. You can stand or sit.
I'm going to let these go around after I'm done speaking so you can look at them.
They're part of the public record when you read them.
Yeah. Tannehill still in the Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee for the record. The water, of course, is still there. We're still here. The first thing I'm going to be talking about is on Facebook. Over instead, City of Reno has an issue. They only have one policeman for that whole area. And there has been burglaries and thrashing of homes and cars and that kind of stuff. But, you know, that kind of thing. My issue is the fact that the City of Reno wants to grow north. The City of Reno isn't taking care of the responsibilities of growing by having all the proper infrastructure. We're not just talking sewer anymore. We're talking total infrastructure. I've talked about it before. If you're going to grow, you make sure you have your fire, your police, your sewer, your water. You have to have all that before developers can come in and do that stuff. Or have them pay ahead of time for that stuff so it's in place by the time they finally get their people there. You know, they want to grow and make money. It's not your responsibility to make them money. They need to figure out how to make that money. That's number 1. Number 2, FEMA. I went out and I was looking at their new regulations for the flooding. After Texas had flooding from the hurricanes and downstream flooding based upon developers building up higher and higher so the people down lower are getting flooded. It's time for everybody that is in some kind of planning and approving development, read the new requirements out there, because number 1, I know Washoe County already has it set up that it's something that they try not, they're supposed to encourage no building in floodplains. It states right in their Washoe County code. I'm not sure about the City of Reno yet, but doing a Clomar or a Lomar so that you can put a whole bunch of industry in an area that doesn't belong and changing the master plan, why are we bothering with a master plan? Number 2, if everybody remembers, Prado Ranch North was overturned by Washoe County Board of Commissioners after a planning commission said no to it. We, as residents, did a fundraiser last Saturday. I have right now over 160 signatures that will be going to FEMA as soon as I can get a copy of the Clomar or Lomar for Prado Ranch. And we are voting, we are telling them no, do not approve the Clomar or the Lomar.
You need to wrap up.
Okay,
You're
and the last thing is that also leads to, we did a judicial review petition for Prado Ranch North. The residents, if you all realize, are saying enough. Knock it off, quit developing, figure out what you need to do.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? If not, we will move on to business of the day. Item A for possible action is a Regional Planning Commission Resolution 18-03, resolution of appreciation for the service of Diane Vanderwill as chair of the RPC for 2017 through 2018. Ms. Robinson, would you read the resolution?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas Diane Vanderwill served as the chair of the Regional Planning Commission for the second time in 2017-18, and whereas Diane Vanderwill has joined a select group of individuals who have served on the Regional Planning Commission representing 2 different jurisdictions in a very effective manner, and whereas throughout her tenure, Diane Vanderwill engaged in and efficiently guided numerous policy discussions and regular business items, and whereas during Diane Vanderwill's service as chair of the RPC, she led the Regional Planning Commission in the discussion of a wide range of regional topics, including the 2019 Regional Plan Update, housing affordability in the Truckee Meadows region, stormwater issues, public infrastructure and services, and the future growth of our region. And whereas Diane Vanderwill ensured that the discussion and deliberation on items that were heard by the RPC during her tenure as chair were focused on the appropriate issues with careful and thoughtful consideration, and she also participated in these discussions in an invested and engaged manner. And whereas Diane Vanderwill hosted very efficient meetings and works with staff in a timely manner to address any concerns she may have as the chair, and whereas Diane Vanderwill supported the efforts of TMRPA to provide data-driven, thoughtful analysis for public and private decision makers, and was continually committed to supporting comprehensive and innovative approaches for planning in our region, and whereas Diane Vanderwill always treated staff with a great deal of respect and appreciation, and staff always enjoyed her focused, efficient, and thoughtful leadership during the commission meetings, and whereas Diane Vanderwill, in her role as chair of the RPC, always arrived stylishly in her little blue sports car to lead these efforts. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Diane's colleagues on the Regional Planning Commission and TMRPA staff express their gratitude to Ms. Vanderwill for her conscientious public service as the chair of the Regional Planning Commission from July 2017 to July 2018.
Thank you. To entertain a motion,
Commissioner Weisky, so moved.
is there a second?
I'll Mr. Chesney, second.
Well, we've got lots of seconds. So it's been moved by Commissioner Weisky and seconded by Commissioner Peterson. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, on to item B for possible action. Public hearing for regional planning conformance review, City of Sparks.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Chris Tolley, Team RPA for the record. The case before you is Regional Plan Performance Review for a City of Sparks Comprehensive Plan Amendment, 7900 Pyramid Way, case number 18-001. Here is the regional location map showing the subject property. As indicated on this slide, the site is located in the City of Sparks' portion of the Truckee Meadows Service Areas, or TMSA. The proposed amendment to the City of Sparks Comprehensive Plan reconfigures the land uses. It does not modify the number of residential units and the Stonebrook development. The site is approximately 167.1 acres in size and located at the southeast corner of La Posada Drive and Pyramid Way. This table shows the proposed difference between the existing and proposed land uses. The multifamily residential is increasing by 5 acres, and that's the top line, or the second top line. The commercial is decreasing by 12.3 acres, and intermediate density residential is increasing by 7.3 acres. This slide shows the existing land use configuration on the left, and then the proposed on the right, with the same orientation for everybody looking in that direction. For policy 4.1.3 of the regional plan identifies 6 factors that the RPC must consider, which are listed on this slide. Given that the Stonebrook development overall will not be significantly altered, staff doesn't anticipate significant change to the regional form pattern. A small portion of the amendment site is considered development constrained per the regional plan for Playa. This portion of the property is identified as open space in both the existing and proposed. And finally, in relation to the goals and policies of the regional plan, regional planning staff has not identified any significant performance issues and recommends approval of the proposal based on consistency and/or compatibility with the review factors listed in this policy. You can find the suggested motion on the screen or on page 13 of your packet. This concludes staff's presentation. Team RPA and City of Sparks staff are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from commissioners? This is a public hearing item. Do we have? I'm sorry.
Waiting for my more experienced peers.
Oh.
Go first.
Okay, Commissioner Marshall.
Sorry, I don't want to
Chris.
your name, Chris. So fundamentally what's happening here is they're shifting from commercial to residential, and some of it's going into high density and some of it going into intermediate density. That's basically what's happening.
And yeah, in terms of the overall land use, the commercial decreased by 12.3 acres, and then the IDR intermediate density increases by 7.3, and the multifamily increases by 5. So that would be the reconfiguration, the overall change that's being proposed.
And so the number of residential units are held constant,
That's correct, yes.
but we're losing commercial.
There is less commercial acreage, commercially designated land after this proposal.
Just, and forgive me for being a bit of a rookie, but how do you look at jobs, housing balance when you're losing significant amounts of commercial? Right in this area that seems to be dominated by residential and not a whole lot of commercial.
Well, thank you for the question, I guess if it's, or question anyways. So in looking at, I'll break this down into two things. In looking at the overall area, including the intersection of La Posada and Pyramid Way, there is commercially designated land that's in the county that is in that area. And then one of the central points in terms of the policy that addresses the employment center designation, that housing is a central component of that, so, and really increases the viability of that land use designation that is addressed in our particular policy. So from that perspective, the increase or a more viable residential land use designation is looked at overall with the proposal as being a positive outcome, if that answers your question or addresses.
If I,
May I?
yes, please.
Thank you. Kim Robinson for the record. Part of the conversation around jobs housing balance, as I'm sure you know, is always what size to do that type of balancing on, or to do those types of numbers on. And we're in the middle of a regional plan update. I don't know if you've heard, check out our website if you haven't. But we've actually been having that conversation as part of the update in terms of what's the most effective, kind of geography to evaluate those. I can say that previously, we have not generally evaluated jobs housing balance across one project. It's more of across a neighborhood or across a certain circumference, if you will, or geographic area. So from that perspective, your question, we looked at what was surrounding it, what was available around it, and that there is other commercial land available to satisfy that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions? This is a public hearing item as well. Do we have any comments from the public? I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for a motion.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Vanderbilt.
I move to find the 7900 Pyramid Way amendment to the City of Sparks Comprehensive Plan in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report.
Commissioner Chesney, second.
Any discussion? It's been moved by Commissioner Vanderbilt and seconded by Commissioner Chesney. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. We're shifting if these were the public. Oh, thank you. We're now to item C, public hearings for regional plan conformance review for City of Sparks.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Chris Tolley again, for the record. The case before you is a regional plan conformance review for a City of Sparks comprehensive plan amendment, 7,000 Spanish Springs Road, case number CR 18-012. As you can see, the site is located east of the Golden Eagle Regional Park and south of Vista Boulevard. The proposal is an amendment to the City of Sparks comprehensive plan to change the land use designations from 6.26 acres of commercial, 15.57 acres of multifamily residential, 18.56 acres of high-density residential, 18.12 acres of open space, 5 acres of large lot residential, and 11.4 acres of mixed use to approximately 65 acres of intermediate density residential. And finally, the site is approximately 65 acres in size. As indicated on this slide, the site is located in the City of Sparks' portion of the Truckee Meadows service areas, or TMSA. Policy 4.1.3 of the regional plan identifies 6 factors that the RPC must consider, which are listed on this slide. The requested residential density fits within the character of the surrounding area. In terms of jobs housing balance, the change is not expected to provide a significant shift to the local area or region's job housing balance. Together with the requested amendment, a development agreement that limits the number of allowed residential units to 420 to 475 and details of required infrastructure improvements is being proposed and currently processed. Finally, in relation to the goals and policies of the regional plan, regional planning staff has not identified any significant conformance issues and recommends approval of the proposal based on consistency and/or compatibility with the review factors listed in this slide. You can find the suggested motion on the screen or on page 36 of your packet. This does include staff's presentation. Team RTA and City of Sparks staff are available for any questions.
Chris, if I may, I do have a question for you. On page 55 of the general policies, I see that there are several policies where we have to have a yes, and then on conform and yes or no, several of those boxes are checked. Can you please clarify?
Yeah, that is an error by staff. As you can see, the ones on the left identify the policy that is applied. This is the far left of the table, as was described. And the corresponding policy in the yes column should be checked. The rest of the X's are an error. They should not be there. So again, the corresponding yes box should be checked, and the rest of the policy, or the X's, should not be there. If that's clear enough.
So for the record, would you state which policies those are, please?
Yes, that would be, so the no box should be checked for all of them where it is currently checked. And then so for the checks that should remain are for policy 1.1.10, 1.1.2, 1.2.5, 2.2.1, 3.5.1, and 3.6.1. So those would each have a corresponding yes check mark.
And
the
all the
rest would be
others would be
deleted.
blank.
Yes.
Madam Chair, if I may. Chris, you actually said 1.1.2. I believe you meant 1.2.2?
Yes.
Does it have a yes box?
Yes. Thank you.
Any questions from commissioners?
Madam Vice Chair, Commissioner Weisky.
Commissioner West.
Chris, refresh my memory on what policies we have that say it's acceptable and reasonable to eliminate open space and then to delete commercials acreage, which is at a premium according to what we went through when we, at least in the city of Reno, when we were doing our master plan update. I know we've discussed it a great deal here at Regional over the last few years, not having enough commercial. It's very similar to the questions on the last project we just heard. I mean, we're trying to reduce carbon footprints, we're trying to shorten the distance, and yet we're building more houses and taking away workplace. So how does that fit in, do those two things fit into our goals and policies that were established in 2012?
Thank you, and I'll start with the open space. So policy 2.1.1 of the regional plan just requires that the local government master plans address open space. There isn't a particular requirement that we maintain or keep open space. So that's when we go through and do our analysis, that's the guys that we look at it under.
Okay.
And then as far as, and Kim had an excellent point on the previous item, as far as looking at commercial lands and a jobs housing balance, we look at the region, not necessarily a site-specific one, or looking at an area to make sure there is a balance is still maintained or increased in terms of, I was going to say competency, but there's a better descriptive word, but increase, positive increase. So, is that capturing?
So then regionally we look at it, but we don't have a measuring device to say what distance between retail spaces, retail shopping centers, or true commercial, light industrial, heavy industrial zoned areas are to control the amount of travel we have going on. Because what we're talking about with commercial space is we've got one shopping center probably 2 miles away, 3 miles away, not really walkable, okay? But there was space here that could be walkable for the developments that have occurred around it and this future development. As far as workplace, if it's more of an industrial setting or professional office, it's on the other side of the valley. Now, I understood a little better and could put the pieces together for Pyramid Highway, but I'm having a hard time on this one.
Yeah,
So
and
how'd you justify it?
staff's analysis looked at the existence of the commercial area, and I don't know what zones exist or what you consider compatible with that area, but staff looked at the commercial lands that are over there not being fully utilized in terms of there still being vacant properties. So I guess the demand side of that for the commercial services wasn't great enough to say that they weren't fully used up in the area. So, and the distance being, I think a linear view is about a mile, but walking wise, it's probably closer to 2 miles. But that, in terms of staff's analysis, was the justification behind the balance being maintained for jobs and housing in this area.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Vice
I
Chair.
had Commissioner Peterson.
Chris, directly, the border directly west of this property, is that not those ballparks?
Sorry, yes.
Yes, it is.
The ball?
Recreation ball?
Yep.
Do you happen to know how many acres they are on that ballpark?
I don't know the size of the property, and I don't know if there's park staff as far as you're talking Golden Eagle Regional Park?
Judging by your map there, it must be at least twice as large as that, counting all the roadways in and everything, as that partial piece of property, is that not right? They're about pretty close? The acreage it takes up?
We do have Sparks planning staff here.
Good evening, I'm Karen Melby, Development Service Manager. That is the Golden Eagle Park, and I believe it's about 80 acres. That is a lease with the BLM, that property. The Golden Eagle Park is a lease with BLM.
And that ballpark, if I remember right, that's active for at least 8 months out of the year. isn't
No,
it?
it's every month of the year.
Oh, really?
There's about almost every week, year round. They have winter activities and
And that brings me into the my question I'm leading, would there be any, that's all residential, do you think you'd have any notice of complaints from homeowners about that ballpark being close there?
We have worked with the applicant, and in the development agreement, we have required them to do, even though there's no open space, in the development agreement, it requires open space and it requires a buffer between the park and the residential. We've required that there be a buffer, which would be open space. That way there's a separation, and we actually did a line of sight analysis, taking the lights and coming down and seeing where the lights would fall on the property to make sure that the width of the buffer matches so that the lights are not. There will be an aura, but the actual lights will not be projecting onto this property.
The developer give you any estimate on how many residents he wants to put on there?
The development agreement has a restriction of 420.
Thank you.
I think I had Commissioner Hawking and then Commissioner Chesney.
Couple of questions. Let's say they get this developed, and all of a sudden you start hearing complaints because the lights at the ball field are too bright, or the patrons are too noisy. What do we have to fall back on here?
That has been a big issue of concern with the city. We are requiring that they have to notify the purchasers that this is an existing facility that's used year-round, and they have lights on, and they have games up until midnight, so that the people buying these properties will have to be aware of that.
Open space. You're talking about almost 12% of this being taken away or being utilized somewhere else. How much are we really using this development? If we're at a little over 8 acres, shifting that from open space to...
The development agreement requires a minimum, I think it's a 25-foot buffer minimum along that west property boundary, and then there's a little sliver, there's along the other side too. But you have to remember, this property is surrounded by open space. That's
Yeah.
BLM land. So it is surrounded by open space today. But it's BLM land, so.
Well, yeah, but we've all
And the
seen...
Vice Chair, can I shed some light on that?
Yes.
To the city of Sparks, Northwest Reno used to be BLM land also.
Well, and what I was going to say on that was, we also saw an eagle's nest on top of Spanish Springs, not Caldila Plata, but what is it, Los Altos? Comes up from the market.
Yeah,
Top up there was all BLM, button up to Eagle's Nest. And then they did a land swap. Now you've got houses crawling up the hill where it used to be BLM. So to say something's BLM isn't a permanent thing. It's only temporary until BLM says, well, we'll land swap you this for that. And that's how it works. So,
But the development agreement does require them to have the open space.
okay, thank you.
Commissioner Chesney?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. What's the access? How are you going to get to Vista from this thing? I don't see any easements. And has a traffic study been done on what this is going to dump into to wherever the access is?
We had numerous traffic studies. We really did review the traffic. That was one of the big issues that we've had with this project. The access will be coming off of Touchdown where it comes into Vista Boulevard. Then they have, with BLM, they have an access going, you see where Touchdown goes north of that field? They have access that comes across and then connects to their property through the BLM land. So that would be their access coming into the property. The development agreement addresses all the timing of the improvements. They will have to do some improvements to the intersection of Touchdown and Home Run Drive, and then also the intersection improvements with Vista. They also, the other thing that they have to provide is a secondary access coming off. It would be the east side of the property connecting into just south of our fire station. They have to provide a secondary access.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Marsh?
Thank you. Chris, a lot of what's going on here is the change in multifamily, high-density residential to, and loss of mixed use to intermediate density residential. So we're losing the kind of housing that the area desperately needs, which is that kind of missing middle that people refer to, the high density, which tend to be less expensive, multifamily, which tends to be less expensive. Can you talk about how that might be either consistent or inconsistent with the regional plan in terms of the types of housing that's available and the loss of this desperately needed type of zoning?
Part of staff's analysis, I mean, the central component is to look at what exists in the area and all the densities that are out there. But certainly, and that's really the central piece, to look at the context of this area and the region as a whole, and what type of, not necessarily the exact housing products that would be built, and I don't know. But
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
So the current regional plan does not identify specific housing types that are needed. That being said, we did a housing study in 2016 that certainly identified that missing middle housing and other types are necessary in our community. And we, during the regional plan update conversation that we'll be having in just a few minutes, we are going to talk about that a little bit as well. So while there's nothing in the plan, the 2012 plan right now, that we can really say, so we're losing this type of housing, that conversation is, and I hate to say this to you again, but part of the regional plan update that is ongoing.
Thank you.
If I may add something, Commissioner Marshall. I'm Armando Nelson, Assistant Community Services Director for the City of Spark. And part of what's going on with this property is we have 65 acres of privately owned land that is surrounded by BLM land on 3 sides. And in fact, the city has a lease for BLM underneath the park. So it's in fact, at this point, surrounded entirely by BLM land. We have very heavy use of that facility. We have some traffic congestion now. Frankly, what we were looking to do, in part by supporting the applicant's request to go to single family on this, was to reduce the impacts of that facility on our facility, or of that property being developed on our facility. The master plan land uses that are on that site now, to be frank, unrealistic in terms of that type of mixed-use development in that location so far removed from a major road and the rest of the urban area. We feel this is a better use. In this case, we frankly feel that reducing the intensity and density of development on that site makes it much more compatible with the surrounding land uses than what's on the books now in terms of the master plan. So, for your homes, the employment generating uses, in the ideal world, maybe would have worked, but we don't see them working in this location both for market reasons and because of the impacts that we've had in terms of our facility to the world.
So what would be the allowed, Mr. Annals, the allowed, if you went ahead with the current zoning and master plan designations, or whatever the appropriate terminology is. Right now, you have a DA that has 420 units.
420 to 470 actually, with the ranges.
And under the existing zoning, how many units would you have?
Theoretically, it would be.
What kind of reduction are you getting?
Armando, it was like 825.
About 825. I mean, it was a theoretical maximum density because you had multifamily densities and then you had employment uses. Employment uses in particular would have been, would have generated more traffic than some of
the housing.
Yeah. So all of the traffic has to come in, off of Vista there. What we're trying to do is peel off through separate access the residential traffic from the park traffic. But it's a very heavily used facility, and again, we believe these land uses, these proposed land uses in terms of the single family, are much more compatible in that location with the surrounding area, and in particular with the city's parking.
Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? This is a public hearing item. Is there any public comment?
I'd like to make one public comment. The address that you had 7900 Spanish Springs Road. I'm not sure where you got that because Spanish Springs Road is accessed off of Sparks Boulevard and not Vista. So if you look at our description in our staff report, we described it in a location as being east of the park and south of Vista. I'm not sure. So I wanted to get that clarified because I'm not sure where you got the 7900 Spanish Springs Road. Because Spanish Springs Road is actually off of Sparks Boulevard. I just wanted to clarify that so that it doesn't mess up your motion legally.
Please make sure to modify the language in the potential motion.
Does that present a noticing issue to our council?
Can we potentially take a 5-minute recess?
Yes. We're recessed for 5 minutes to confer for,
That is the correct address. It should, the address on our task bill.
okay, we're at recess right now.
Chris, here's a clicker thing. Maybe it'll allow you to stand.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Kim Robinson, for the record. We have the letter from the City of Sparks dated August 8th, 2018, and it does identify 7000 Spanish Spring Road as the address for this particular request. So I hope that clarifies this conversation.
Okay. Any other questions from commissioners? There were no public comments back in this one. So calling for a motion.
Madam Vice Chair.
Commissioner Weiss.
Thank you.
He was ahead of you.
That's quite all right, go. Trying to move things along.
In the case of CR 18-012, 7000 Spanish Springs Road, I move to find the 7000 Spanish Springs Road, Foothills at Wingfield, amendment to the City of Sparks Comprehensive Plan in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report, and I can make all of the findings.
Commissioner Vanderwell, second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Weisky and seconded by Commissioner Vanderwell. Any discussion?
Yeah, Commissioner Fewens, I'd like to, City of Sparks, we did look at this site very heavily, and we don't like to take commercial out. I mean, that's, we don't, your questions about multifamily and different things, and if you drive out in that area west of the current Rayleighs, we've, right now that are being built are 600 apartment homes that are going in right there, so we could, when we looked at this area, the traffic obviously coming down Vista was a area of concern, and we looked at that going, boy, it'd be, if we could really find that moving these to more intermediate residential could help relieve that, and with the area having 600 apartment homes going up, we felt like we could find that housing balance as well.
Before I call for the question, I do remind commissioners that if you're voting no, you need to cite which parts of the policy and goal statement that you're basing your no vote on. We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'll take that back. You had a question.
Yeah, we had openness for discussion. I just wanted to, I feel a little hamstrung because I'm unfortunately just called within the last couple hours to become substitute here. I do find it very troubling that the regional plan apparently has no policies that are applicable here to the type of situation that we're facing, notwithstanding I understand the traffic situation on Vista and the desire to reduce the traffic generating uses on the site. It is
Commissioner
problematic.
Marshall, your question is specific to housing, correct?
I'm sorry, why are you interrupting?
Well, I'm just asking a point of clarification. Which policies are you referring to?
Well, we are open for discussion, right? So I'm discussing.
All right.
And I'm getting there.
Okay.
I look very forward to our discussion regarding the new regional plan that hopefully will allow us to have policies for all jurisdictions that preserve the ability to develop the kind of housing that we need. Thank you.
Any other discussion before I call? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now to item D, Regional Plan Conformance Review, City of Reno Master Plan Amendment, Valley Road.
So I'll stand for this one. Mix it up a little bit. Good evening, Commissioners. Chris Tolley, Team RPA for the record. The case before you is Regional Plan Conformance Review for City of Reno Master Plan Amendment, Valley Road. Case number CR 18-013. Here is the regional location map. As you will note, the property is inside the McCarran Ring. The proposal is a master plan amendment from Special Planning Area, University of Nevada Regional Center, to change the sub-land use designation on the subject property from open space to residential on an approximately 4.93 acre portion of an overall 5.43 acre site. The remaining portion, a 20-foot wide strip on the northern boundary of the property, and that would be up here, will remain open space. Although it is not shown on this aerial from 2013, student housing is located immediately south of the amendment site. As indicated on this slide, the site is located in the City of Reno's portion of the Truckee Meadows service areas, or TMSA. The subject site is within the university, again, within the University of Nevada Regional Center. Now, policy 4.1.3 of the regional plan identifies 6 factors that the RPC must consider, which are listed on the slide. Regional centers are traditional core areas as noted in the regional plan. These areas are expected to be characterized by a vital mix of uses, including more intense residential uses than elsewhere in the urban footprint. The proposed change meets this vision. According to the materials submitted by the City of Reno, public infrastructure to serve the site is currently in place, including roadways, sewer, water, and power. Finally, in relation to the goals and policies of the regional plan, regional planning staff has not identified any significant conformance issues and recommends approval of the proposal based on consistency and or compatibility with the review factors listed on this policy. And finally, you can find the suggested motion on the screen or on page 61 of your packet. This concludes staff's presentation. Team RPA and City of Reno staff are available for any questions.
Commissioners, questions from commissioners? for planning staff, or this is a public hearing item. If there's public comment, just fill out a public comment card. If not, bring it back to the commission for a motion.
I just have one brief question here. As,
Okay, Commissioner Hopkins.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hawkins on there. It says on the police part of this, before issuance of a building permit, new development shall identify and fund, we were options so that concurrency will be met before occupancy of each structure. I've never done that before. I've never seen anybody do funding before they get to where they gotta go. Can somebody else help me out here? I'm worried about where we're getting the funds at, or why the wording fund is in this sentence. I don't, yeah.
Ms. Roberts, it's going to take a couple of minutes, just a second or two to look that up.
Could you share with me what page? Page 82?
That's page 5 on this.
No, it's page 83.
83.
Oh, yeah, 83.
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Kim Robinson for the record. So this is a summary of the concurrency options directly from the City of Reno's master plan.
Okay. My concern was that we didn't even go over this in our own entity. That's why I was concerned.
Okay.
Funding, we want to get involved with funding when we meet for the planning commission.
We have planning staff, City of Reno planning staff.
Thank you. Good evening, Heather Manzo, Associate Planner for the record. To help address your question as far as concurrency goes with the City of Reno Master Plan, new development does provide for oftentimes improvements necessary for the development of those facilities. And the City Council, as a part of their budget, identifies funding for allocating for the folks to provide those services. So that's how city staff was able to make those findings, and how City Council was as well.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions from commissioners? Now may we move to a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Hopkins.
I move to find the,
And it's right
I
up.
move to find the Valley Road Amendment to the City of Reno Master Plan in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report. And I can make the findings now.
Commissioner Vanderwell, second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Hawkins and seconded by Commissioner Vanderbilt. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're now to item excuse me, thank you, I saw it. Public hearing, regional planning conformance review, City of Reno Master Plan Amendment, United Federal Credit.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Nate Kusha, Team RPA. This presentation is for a regional plan conformance review for City of Reno Master Plan Amendment, case number CR 18-014, United Federal Credit Union, which can be found starting on page 85 of your packet. Before we get started, I would like to point out that there is a mistake in your staff report on this item in the background section on page 85, which states, on July 30th, 2018, the City of Reno and the Washoe County Planning Commissions held a joint meeting and recommended approval of the Master Plan Amendment. This was meant to say that on July 30th, 2018, the Reno City Council and Washoe Board of County Commissioners held a joint meeting and approved the Master Plan Amendment. City of Reno and Washoe Planning Commissions did hold a joint meeting on this item in April, where Reno Planning Commission recommended approval and Washoe County Planning Commission recommended denial, but it was approved by both the Reno City Council and the Washoe Board of County Commissioners. On the screen is a map showing the general location of the amendment site. This amendment seeks to change approximately 2.57 acres of low-density suburban/rural residential and roughly 1.02 acres of open space to to about 2.73 acres of general commercial and 0.86 acres of open space. Overhead is a map showing the aerial imagery of the location of the subject site. The amendment site has commercial development to the east and south, and to the north and west lies the Vista Hills Planned Unit development. The parcels adjacent to the subject site are designated for non-residential development within this PUD. As you can see, this area is in transition, and the proposed amendment would be consistent with the developing area. Here's a closer look at the subject site. It's located in the City of Reno's portion of the TMSA and lies within the Reno-Steg Joint Corridor Planning Area. As you can see, a portion of the amendment site is considered development constrained for slopes greater than 30% per the regional plan. According to the submitted materials, though the proposed open space land use will be reduced by roughly 0.16 acres, the boundary will still include the sloped areas and will better align with the existing contours on the site. In addition, Policy 2.2.1 of the regional plan places specific limitations on development within DCA areas. This requirement is addressed by the City of Reno Master Plan Guiding Principle 7.1b, which limits developments on slopes of 30% or greater and requires 2-to-1 mitigation for encroachment. Overhead is the review criteria for this conformance review, also found in your packet on page 86. Staff has found that the proposed amendment is compatible with the surrounding land uses. And in relation to public services and infrastructure, the site is currently subject to the City of Reno's concurrency management system, which was found in conformance with Policy 3.5.1 of the regional plan, and ensures that necessary public facilities and services to support new development are or will be available at the time the impacts of new development occur. So in relation to the goals and policies of the regional plan, staff has not identified any significant conformance issues of the proposed amendment and recommends approval based on consistency and/or compatibility with the factors listed in Policy 4.1.3. You can find a suggested motion on the screen or on page 89 of your packet. This concludes my presentation, and myself, as well as City of Reno staff, are available for any questions.
Thank you. Questions from commissioners? If I may, I do have a question in terms of, and I've spoke with Ms. Robinson about this earlier today, in terms of if you could put the map back up there.
Yeah.
The aerial view. How is this project planning to have access to it from what village?
I'm going to turn that to City of Reno staff to answer.
Sure. Thank you, Heather Manzo, Associate Planner, again for the record. There's a private driveway that's located to the north of the subject site. Can I? Yes, exactly. You've got it. That's it.
It's that big middle button.
Okay. So there's an existing drive that accesses through to the existing pharmacy there, and the applicant will utilize that roadway to access the property.
So it's a left turn in. So is there going to be a change to Lemon Drive to
There is a special use permit that's under review for the specific development, and any necessary mitigation will be addressed at that time.
As you know, this map is very old.
Mhm.
Because on the east side of that, there's all kinds of commercial development now, and access there. What people are doing now is right at that driveway, they're doing U-turns, or they're going down to military and doing U-turns. Okay.
Thank you. We'll make sure we address that in our analysis with the SUP.
Other questions from commissioners? This is a public hearing item. Is there any public comment? We'll turn the card well. Pass it to the clerk.
Pass it to the clerk.
So we can take a dance around tables. That was good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Tammy Holstill, Lemon Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee, for the record. Not that we don't need commercial businesses, but we do need proper accesses in and out. Today, I made it a point to take photos as we were driving, and I can send this around, but there is a lot of traffic on Lemon Drive. And there you go, so you can see it on the camera there. Okay. Going in and out of that spot, I have seen so many accidents because of people trying to get in when there's no way to make a left-hand turn, to go to the light, to make a left-hand turn from Walgreens. So they go out this drive right here to make a left-hand turn, to go down Lemon Drive to go back to their homes. This is a busy street. It is a 4-lane street. Trying to make a left-hand turn out of that area is dangerous. Then you add in the development, and I have a picture of that too. Actually, I have a hard copy of that. That has just decided that they should have an access road to Lemon Drive that the city of Reno wasn't going to pay attention to until I started squawking, and you can pass that around. That right there is the apartments that were being discussed that are down below on Military and Lemon. Now they're making a road or a street to come out onto Lemon Drive. There are issues out there. City of Reno, Regional, Washoe County need to stop. You need to look at all this before you keep shoving stuff in. Period, end of story. It's a mess and you're making it worse. Look at what you're doing before you sit there and just say, okay, let's go. Let's just keep putting it in there. We don't care if the residents have to live in this mess. Because that's what it seems like. And it is a mess. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from commissioners?
I do. Madam Chair.
Commissioner Hawkins.
For the record, Commissioner Hawkins, I've got to respond to that left turn into the Walgreens. It is dangerous. It needs to be looked at seriously. And not only that, but the new credit union looks like it's going to be right over the top of the retention pond that was put there for Walgreens years ago. I'd like to see how they're going to mitigate that and where the next retention pond is going to go.
Madam Chair, if I may ask a question,
Yes.
please.
Yes, please.
Heather, City of Reno staff. Heather, won't the City of Reno Planning Commissioners see that level of detail when the SUP comes before the Planning Commission for a project? Because tonight there's not a project before us.
That's correct. Heather Manzo, Associate Planner with the City of Reno again. That's exactly right. Should the master plan amendment be approved and certified by City Council after tonight, the applicant is in with a zoning map amendment to be consistent with the master plan amendment, and then the special use permit will definitely be before the Planning Commission for consideration of all of those elements, including drainage and access.
Thank you.
Ms. Rollins.
Madam Chair, Kim Rollinson again for the record. Ms. Holtzville, the picture that you showed on your phone, if you could, we'll talk to you offline, if you could send that to us and we'll get it in our archive. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions from commissioners? If not, I'm prepared to hear a motion.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Weiss.
Thank you. In the case of CR 18-014, I move to find the United Federal Credit Union Amendment to the City of Reno Master Plan in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report, and I can make all of the findings.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Commissioner Weisky and seconded by Commissioner Hawkins. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We're now at item F, discussion and possible action regarding the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan update. Just moving computers around and presentations around, so just to bear with us, please. In our tight, confined quarters. Watch Commissioner Vanderbilt, Commissioner Hawkins tip their table again.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Terry Moore, Echo Northwest, the consultant to the Truckee Meadows group. And We have a presentation tonight on several topics, and the agenda follows more or less the process that we've been using to go through the plan. And that is, we start with what matters, the goals, what are we trying to achieve. Then we're developing land use scenarios to test what happens under different land uses. And we will then evaluate the scenarios against measurements that are consistent with those goals. Having done that, we will present that to you and to the governing board. And then finally, we will present to you policies for your consideration that would be consistent with achieving a preferred scenario that you and the governing board would select from having reviewed the scenarios that we've put together. All of that we'll explain in more detail tonight, some of which we've talked to you about before. I have a short version of this, and I'm just going to talk about the goals. If you recall, we met with you about a month ago, and at that time we talked to you about issues and how those issues led us to conclusions about categories of goals. You had a discussion about that, and at the end approved that we can take those categories to the governing board at a meeting that we subsequently had with them. We did that. We took those categories, and then we also fleshed out for those categories what the goals would be. Now, these are high-level goal statements. We presented these to the governing board. They accepted them with some amendments. They made amendments to and what stands now are the goals as reviewed, amended, and amended by the governing board several weeks ago. We will take it to the governing board tomorrow with your approval to see if we can get final approval of these. The 6 categories are the ones that we talked to you about before, and you can now see how we have fleshed out those goals. There is one element here that is in italics. That is an amendment that we made today based on our conversations with the planners working group, where they noted that we had talked about public facilities but had not talked about other public services, which was, we acknowledged was not our intent. So these are the broad goal statements. We are proceeding under the assumption that these goal statements are something very close to those will be accepted, and are working to try to convert those goal statements into measurable criteria that we can use to help evaluate the scenarios that we are putting together. And Jeremy will be up next to talk about what those scenarios are and show you some of the criteria that we are using. So at this point, I would turn it over to you to see if you have any comments for us, because otherwise we would be taking these to the governing board tomorrow to take a look at.
So commissioners, any questions regarding the goal categories?
How are we running on a time schedule? We're getting all right on this?
On time schedule?
Yeah.
Well, it took a little bit while with those 4 conformance reviews, but I think
Thank you about it.
There you go.
I'm still going to sue.
Commissioner, we are still on schedule, and every time we tell you that, it's true, and we worry if it's going to be true next time. So we are now worried about whether it will be true next time, but right now we are pretty certain that we will have 4, and Jeremy will talk about this, 4 scenarios developed, the evaluation of those scenarios against criteria, and some ideas, some preliminary ideas about policies at the November meeting. And we will know better after we meet with the governing board tomorrow and see if we are on track with the scenarios that we're about to present you tonight.
I'll make a comment here. I recognize all the hard work you people have put into this. I really appreciate it. And I would like to see it end on time.
Ms. Roberts.
Madam Chair, attachment 1 for this agenda item 6F is the project schedule. You have the original project schedule on one side, which looks like this. And we also provided you with an updated, more detailed timeline for the next few months here as well. So that's in your packet.
Question for Kim.
Oh, yes.
The concerns I was expressing earlier about housing and type of housing, which one, what goal category does that fit under?
I would say equity and diversity. Yeah. I personally think it stretches across a variety of them, including quality of regional living and economy. But Terry, did you want to?
Yeah, I would, when we've had conversations about, one of the conversations we had with the governing board was, this is a high level, these are high level goals, and we gave a list of things underneath that that they might want to consider as amendments or additions to the goal statements. One of those was affordable housing, which I'm relatively certain we put under quality of regional living, but I'm not 100% sure of that right now.
In fact, if I remember correctly, we had quite a conversation around a diversity of settings and a diversity of types of housing at that retreat, and it was under quality of regional living now that you're reminding me of that, because we modified the wording on it.
Right, and so when we had the meeting at the last meeting with them, on the table were those items that they might want to add, and then we listened to their discussion, and that did not come up as part of the discussion. Having said that, it is not our intent not to include affordable housing. I mean, as you'll see when Jeremy presents, there is a lot of work on housing going into this, and I would expect that, and as you look at what we're trying to do, we're focusing on affordability by getting a diversity of housing types, including the reference that someone made recently to the missing middle. And we're also looking at where the public facilities are so that we can try to see how we can reduce public facility costs. So, and moreover, there's a lot of other work being done that will end up being included as addenda to the plan and included in the work plan of the plan that is being done by Enterprise on affordable housing. So the plan will be, there will be a lot of discussion in the plan about affordable housing.
Hopefully not just affordable.
Diversity of housing.
Thank you.
Other questions regarding these goal categories? Comments?
Okay, then I think it's your sharing.
Good evening, Jeremy Smith, the GIS coordinator at Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency. Happy to be here to show you the progress we've been making on the scenario side of things. What I have tonight is quite a bit of information about housing. The piece we're still working on, two pieces really, are the metrics that Terry alluded to. We have some of that stuff put together, and you'll get to see that tonight, and also the employment side of things. We've done employment forecasts previously, but of course we're trying to sort of give it a good treatment and make sure that it resonates with these four scenarios that we're looking at as part of the regional plan update. I think it's very important, we talked about it today, that these are not the futures that we're necessarily trying to achieve. In fact, these are four separate scenarios that have different attributes, hopefully separate enough that we'll be able to see differential impacts so that we can actually work our way towards a preferred scenario that's probably the blend of a lot of the ideas in here. So, you know, these are simulations of the future, and really the reason to do that is to try to head off impacts or issues before they occur, and to understand how to craft policy in the regional plan update that addresses those issues. And so some of you may remember these four. The top two, the number one, historical, and two trends, those are both the scenarios that were done in the housing study, which we completed in, I think it was 2016. The first one is really just trying to mimic the previous 15 years. So we were looking at a period of 2000 to 2015, what built, what density class mix, and I'll show you the density classes, but basically we categorize land into 5 different density classes with this idea of low density suburban being half-acre lots and larger. That's at one end of the spectrum, all the way up to apartment complexes that are 30 dwelling units or more dense, like you might find in Midtown or downtown. So we really tried to mimic that distribution of housing types that built from 2000 to 2015 in that first scenario, and also where in the region they built. So a lot of that stuff was towards the edge, and it really kind of spread out. So that was this one scenario. And then we said, what if we dared dream a little bit and bring some of the units back into the McCarran Ring? We chose that because it was a pretty familiar road that folks can get their minds around that geography. And we were looking at a slightly denser mix. One of the things that distinguishes scenarios 1 and 2, though, from the new scenarios we're working on now, 3 and 4, is that we did not change any of the zoning. We fit all of the new growth that we were going to build into the existing zoning, parcel by parcel. However, in scenarios 3 and 4, which are where we're really daring to dream, I think we're even taking on some upzoning, we're calling it. I have an example of that to show you. But to differentiate the two, scenario 3 is this idea of a compact suburban development. We often refer to it as smart greenfield. So still kind of moving into our developing areas, but doing so in such a way that we're working on some of the, the practices and hitting that missing middle housing and trying to build products that provide that diversity, but definitely taking advantage of vacant land. But then also, some portion of that, and I'll show you that, is going to happen inside the core of the city. Flip that around, kind of yin-yang, down to number 4, which is the infill development. That is where we're really trying to do kind of, maybe it's a classic plannery kind of an exercise, but we're really trying to load up the units into the core part of our region. So we've turned up the redevelopment a little bit, turned up realization of units on underutilized land. It's about a 65-35 split. So in the edge or smart greenfield scenario, we're doing 65% of the new units in developing areas and even what we consider rural, and I'll show you a map of different neighborhood types. Whereas in the infill scenario, we're doing 65% of the new units we would realize within the core of our community. So those are the 4 scenarios. And to pull this off, there's really sort of three main steps that we're trying to take on here. The first is this idea of characteristics of the land itself. The slope, right? The distance to roads. Is it employment land or is it residential land? What's it zoned for? All these kinds of things. So we have about 47 or 50 variables that we kind of use to guide that. And what ends up happening, well, I'll just keep going here because I won't have an example. So that's step 1. Step 2 is the allocation itself. So once we figure out the characteristics of the land that we're interested in for a given lens or a given scenario, then we have to put the units on the ground. And that's supported by a lot of good work we've done together, to really understand what we have zoned parcel by parcel and what parcels can actually accommodate with regard to, in this case, residential. And then finally, there's this evaluation piece where, we don't just want to do this and just look at it. We want to make sure that there's something that comes out of it that helps us to understand why one pattern is superior to another, or maybe it's superior in one way and inferior in another way. There's many different ways to look at these simulations. So that's definitely what we're trying to do. And we have some reporting that we're going to do, and we are trying to tie that to the goals that Terry just presented. So here's that first part, and we've seen this, you guys have seen this before. The characteristics that affect development. This is a spreadsheet on the right, which we're happy to email to you. Damien, did we email these guys that spreadsheet?
Well, we emailed the local resources.
We shared it with our regional plan update working group this morning. But basically, it's a list of the variables we've put to these 40-acre hexagon bins. That's how we're building a regional model, right? With these big bins. And everything's kind of managed, well, not everything, but most of it is managed at the parcel level, and then gets aggregated up to these bins. It's a very non-jurisdictional approach that we're also doing. We don't really have any jurisdictional sort of caveats built in. But we do have this spreadsheet, and you can weight different things, different factors to kind of understand what's important to you. In an infill scenario, you might weight factors that are distance from the downtown center. Whereas in a smart greenfield, it might be distance to trunk level infrastructure, right? Even if it's out in a North Valley somewhere. So we have this available, we'll send it to you, and actually Damien, who is the GIS analyst at TMRPA, has done a great job of getting the functionality of this tool online. So now you can change the weights, run the realization, and you'll see step one, the characteristics part. We're working on the other two, get them online. But there's actually something interactive out there now, so we're pretty excited about that. And this is how we came up with a couple of composites for scenario 3. This is not it. This is live, work, play composite is really for scenario 4, the infill scenario. And these 9 factors were selected and weighted from a range of 0 to 10, right? As far as what's important, it's pretty even weighted right now. But it's stuff like how frequent does transit come by? Can you get to transit? What's the density of job types that are associated with infill type scenarios, so office jobs, service and retail. And then distance to green space. There's sort of a walkability score and that MI8 business point amenity score, and then distance to the downtown core. So it's somewhat contrived, but again, these are, the attempt here is to focus units into the core of our community. So you can see that blue blob. It really is kind of highly influenced by where we have transit right now. But that would be the top quartile of scores. So if you scored every hexagon, there's about 5,500 hexagons. The blue scores are the top 25% of scores. So that's going to drive, underlying all the next pieces I'll show you, that's driving where units are going to locate in this scenario. I don't have an example here, but when you look at the infrastructure-based composite that we put together for the smart greenfield scenario, it's a very different pattern. It doesn't look like this at all. It's more dispersed, it's more along highways and infrastructure pieces. So, and we'll see an example at the end here of that. But again, these are the things we're trying to hit. So that really is the first step. What is the high value land for a given scenario? Once that's established, then we get to step 2, which is the step that's been keeping me up at night. But it's the allocation step, right? How do we actually take what we've zoned in these areas and build houses in there to realize that future? I will tell you that based on the new consensus forecast that you guys adopted at your last meeting, thank you, there's about 107,000 people, give or take, looking at, that's the projection for the next 20 years, so out to 2038. That translates with some math that takes into account a person per household multiplier and a vacancy rate of around 8% to about 44,400 units. That's our target right now, 44,440 units. So that's what we're trying to hit. And we're trying to get to those units in 4 different ways. Number 1 is vacant land, right? That's kind of the low-hanging fruit. If it's vacant, it's zoned residential, we can put houses on it, right? So most of the realization of these units is actually on the vacant land. But we also have this concept of underutilized land. These are parcels and lands that have a unit currently, like single family detached, but they could actually support more units. Then there's redevelopable land. This is where you tear something down and build something new. So we've identified some of that, and I'll talk about those assumptions. And finally, upzoning, the concept that you would take existing zoning, wherever it might be, and you might try to realize more units on it by talking with the developer, by making a change. We saw some changes tonight come through as master plan amendments. That kind of activity could actually upzone the density on a site. And then we had a nice discussion this morning about this concept of accessory dwelling units. And those really are interesting. They could occur in underutilized land. You could put like a granny flat in the backyard if there's sort of this allowance for units, but also according to what Washington County staff was saying this morning, on certain zoning types, even if it's just zoned for that one single family dwelling unit, you can still add an accessory unit. So it kind of crosses the line. It's kind of this mysterious 5th type that we're not addressing directly, but we can sort of bake it in there.
Jeremy, excuse me.
Yeah, please stop me if you want to ask questions.
Jeremy, you're following what Reno's doing with ADUs right now? At
Yeah.
the last hearing we had?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not, my understanding is it's not actually sort of approved yet, but it's getting closer. What's the?
Gone from planning commission to city council.
Okay.
And then it's going to be up for city council discussion and review.
Great.
Shortly.
And that would be the final step, and then it would be allowed in certain areas, or is it
Maybe,
just?
unless it gets sent back.
Might get sent back, I'm sure. Okay, well, yeah.
Crystal ball's as good as mine.
Well, I'm working on my crystal ball. Well, one of the things we have to consider too is that different parts of town have different character with regard to the kind of neighborhood type we have. We decided to kind of divvy the land up, working with consultants, into these 5 neighborhood types, and they are developing areas. Those are the areas in purple. These are PUD and tentative map areas that, you know, are slated for kind of this suburban development usually, but maybe some opportunities for upzoning in there. Also employment lands, those are in blue. These are just really employment-dominated areas. Existing neighborhoods are in green. These are places where there's a bunch of single-family homes right now, or maybe some apartments. But it's pretty well built. Then we have that red kind of spine going, you know, the cross there. That's our mixed-use area, and these mimic the master plan that was recently adopted by Reno and the master plan land use at Sparks as well. Right as of now, I don't think there's any mixed use actually zoned in the county, but we have some options for redevelopment. And then finally, the orange area is rural. These are areas that have really low density housing or nothing. And so those are the 5 neighborhood types that we then try to fit our housing projection ideas into. And so there's a couple of important things here. Number one, on the bottom, you can kind of see this is the targets, if you will, by neighborhood type. There's only 4 neighborhood types because we developed the targets before we came up with employment. And in fact, we don't really have to use the employment lands to realize these per se, although we could if we decided to do that and say like a preferred scenario. But right now, we're just kind of trying to put housing into these 4 for scenarios 3 and 4. And at the bottom, you can see the 65 and 35. So this is for the infill scenario where centers and Todd's are the mixed-use area, and the existing neighborhoods are slated to absorb 65% of those 44,000 units. And our newly developing areas, those purple areas and that rural, very low-density stuff, 35. When you think about the smart greenfield scenario, you would just flip that, right? The 65 would be over in the green side, and the 35 would be over. And then we have this column right here, which is really a neat column. And these are the density classes I was talking about. It's a horrible way to present them, I apologize. Really, this is low density suburban, D1, that's the very low stuff. D2 is a moderate density suburban, anywhere from 2 to 7 dwelling units per acre. Then this is that kind of missing middle category where you can go from very small single-family detached lots to single-family attached, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, that sort of thing. It's anywhere from 15 to 30 dwelling units, 7 to 15 dwelling units per acre in this region. D4, this is a moderate density multifamily. Here we're looking at 15 to 30 dwelling units per acre. And then finally D5, which is greater than 30. So that's where you have your pretty high density stuff. We wanted to make sure that we maintain this consistency through both of those 2 scenarios, because this is based on the work done in our housing study, the work Mike and Terry have looked at, the housing study that came out of the city of Reno. This is, we think, a pretty good attempt at meeting the expected demand with regard to preferences, the kind of diversity of housing that's come up tonight. So really, classically, if you look at our community, just look at all the houses that are built right now, we have 46 to 47% of that. And if you look at what we've built over the past 20 years, it's closer to like 48 or 50% or something.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Just really quickly, the D1 through D5, those match the categories that we used in the housing study.
They're exactly the same, yeah. And actually, they were adopted by the City of Reno for the master plan update and the housing study as well. So we're kind of trying to get on the same page, absolutely. But it's became a fun exercise to try to, these are percentages over here of the total, right? To try to make all of this work. And in fact, when you go to try to allocate it, you actually need to turn the percentages into numbers of units. I think this is actually an old set of targets, and I can see I've flipped now everything's working like this where I've got my numbers on the left. Because coding, right? But this is not even down in the weeds, right? And this is only a partial screenshot of the spreadsheet that talks about how we can test if we have the capacity with existing zoning. We start by giving an allocation target up top. This could really be any number. We could do a 5-year allocation looking at capacity, or maybe we could try 50 and see where we have shortfalls. In this case, we're realizing 85% of vacant land. This is the infill scenario assumptions again. So we've kind of bumped up this, what you might expect is kind of an infill on that underutilized land. And then also quite a bit of redevelopment. I mean, it's only about 6,600 units, really, so it's not over 20 years. That's not, that's out to lunch. But it did, produce some deficits. So I've got this spreadsheet set up that everywhere in the top line capacity, that's what's zoned today by neighborhood type and by density class. So these bars are about the vacant land. Then our targets are based on the percentages I showed you, which looks like I cheated a little bit when I took this thing. I had 66 and 34, so I'll have to go make sure that, I don't know if that's acceptable. But, it's kind of a game here to get it all to fit. But what you might notice is that there's a couple of red values right there. And what that means is that based on our targets that we're setting, we don't actually have the capacity on vacant land to meet those targets. So this is where we started to get creative, and we did some upzoning. I'll show you a picture of that. But basically, this spreadsheet I thought was pretty neat and allows you to really test, right, where you can fit this stuff. You come up with any number of scenarios, and to just geek out for a second, and the code actually reads the spreadsheet. So you can make the changes right in there and then just run it. And,
Jeremy, before you go any further, can
Yeah.
you go back 3 slides to your hologram? There you go.
hologram, yeah, there you go.
Is that current to what today's master plans look like for Washoe County and City of Reno specific, or North Valleys?
Yes.
Okay.
It was an attempt by me to go through and use the master plan land uses to initially designate the hexagon neighborhood type. I mean, it looks a little wider because they're 40-acre hexagons, but those areas coincide with where that mixed use is in the new Reno master plan. This is the mixed use district in Sparks. There's some mixed use identified in some of the PUD areas. These blue lands are
So the
innovation
North
areas.
Valley's large lots are shown correctly on here. The industrial areas of North Valleys are shown on here.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so this blue, the state airport, and then there's a employment, Moya area there, a lot of. And each hex, actually has a capacity in both dwelling units and acres across those 5 density classes we talked about.
Well, at 40, what was in my mind was at 40 acres, a hexagon.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot to throw your numbers off and skew what you're analyzing in your next slides that you just talked to us about. And that's why I was asking if it's fairly accurate.
It is.
That way.
We track everything at the parcel level, and these parcels are pretty difficult to deal with visually, and because you can have a very small parcel that is zoned for very high density, which is almost invisible on a regional map, but actually can support hundreds of units, right? And you can have a massive parcel towards the edge that's zoned for 1 unit per 40 acres. And so, we've shown parcels in the past, and we do track all the densities at the parcel level, but in an attempt to get away from jurisdictional boundaries and to think regionally, and to kind of think in sort of bigger chunks, and also for this thing to operate fairly quickly, because there's something like, over 150,000 parcels, but there's only 5,000 hexagons, so we can sort of deal with it a lot quicker. But there are trade-offs. You're absolutely right. Okay, so we monkey with this and we get it to work, and we obviously still have some deficits, but here we go. These are actually parcels, and I've turned off the parcel boundaries just to kind of give you the footprint of vacant land within the TMSA. That is that black boundary that all this stuff is inside, the Truckee Meadows services area. Now, I will tell you that this is a really important field, unconstrained acreage. We take off the top any acres that are, strict constraints, like as Nate mentioned, 30%, greater than 30% slopes. They're out. Wetlands and playas and floodways, this kind of thing, federal lands, they're not actually included. So a good example of what seems like a problem is this big blue area in White Lake, right? But in fact, as we progress, I will make that go away, as I have in the past. But underlying that in the data, there's probably only 2 acres that can actually support anything up there in that parcel, because it's all been chopped away. And so we're doing all the math based on the unconstrained area of any given parcel. And of course, we have the zoning. We had to go through over the years, this data hasn't always existed. We've built a lot of this by looking at the PUD handbooks, putting it on the map, I mean, we started with the Washoe County parcels. That's a fantastic starting point, and it's amazing that they're now publicly available. But we've added quite a few, tricks in there as far as attribute fields to allow us to do this kind of work and be as accurate as possible. And not, basically, like for example, MFID. This is the multifamily ID. Depending on what kind of multifamily development you have, if you have an apartment, it's typically one big lot, right? It might have 400 units on it. It'll have just one parcel. But if it's condos that are privately owned, it might have 400 lots on it and a common area and all this kind of thing. And so in order to get an accurate density, we had to link all those together. So that's the kind of work we've been doing. So this is the vacant land. And what's interesting is that I have been going around saying that there's about 90,000 units of capacity on vacant land. But during our housing study, we sort of took an approach where we really tempered what we could realize in the mixed-use areas. As you guys probably know, the mixed-use zoning areas do not have a maximum number of dwelling units per acre. They have minimums, but in fact, if you can make it pencil, I suppose, and get it through, you can build very high-density stuff. We've worked with staff at the local jurisdictions to top set mixed-use areas, so most are in the 30 to 45 dwelling units per acre range, some are 15 in the outskirts. Downtown, I think we went to 150. But we were still tamping that down with a percent residential realization or something of this nature, because we didn't want to necessarily pick winners and losers, but now that we're here, we wanted to basically open up all the capacity we could. And so we removed that, and we gained about 16,000 more acres of potential on vacant land. So a total of 106,000 units, rather dwelling units on vacant land that are theoretically out there. And in fact, we had this conversation this morning as well, and that's even conservative because we're not even maxing out the full parcel, right? So you could, in fact, get even more. But, I tend to be a liberal conservative, so there you go. Don't want to go too far. So vacant land is the big chunk of capacity, but we also have this concept of underutilized land. And these are following this criteria. So had to be single family detached. I only allowed it on 1/3 acre lots and larger. And then this was kind of key that the zoning actually would allow for more density. So it'd be like you had a half-acre lot that had 1 unit on it, let's say, but the zoning would have allowed for 2. So in fact, you would have potential. You could subdivide it. You could go, depending on the zoning, maybe it's a multifamily zoning. Even some of these had 8 to 10 to 100 units that might be realized on really big parcels based on the underlying zoning. So that was kind of how we got to this purple distribution. A lot of it's in kind of existing neighborhoods, obviously, and it translates to about 15,000 units that might be available. I think it's a very conservative estimate. I think it could be higher. We were just talking about the accessory dwelling units. They could participate in this. They could also participate in lands that are built that don't have the zoning, just based on how that gets approved. So it's conservative, but it's plenty. We have 106,000, so 15,000 of this felt like enough. And then redevelopment areas. We tried to stay pretty focused here. I actually calculated redevelopment potential across the TMSA, but after talking with staff, we decided that it would be a good idea to sort of try to target in on the redevelopment zones that have already been identified. Certainly the blue areas are the redevelopment areas 1 and 2 from the new City of Reno master plan. The red area is the mixed use district in Sparks, which I think is pretty close to kind of maybe it's a little bit expansive, so we could tamp that down if we need to. And then the green areas are in Washoe County. And so this is the only jurisdictional portion of my presentation today. But basically, there's been talk of potential redevelopment along the Sun Valley corridor at Survey Transit. And then there's this neat little marriage of a redevelopment area in Reno and then an area of Old Verdi that's actually in the county. And maybe there's a way to kind of make that work together as well. So those are the areas that were identified. And as far as within them, what parcels would qualify to become redeveloped, these were our criteria. So number 1, the land value needed to be equivalent or greater than the building value. So, nice, good land, building, not so good. Built before 2000, so it's an arbitrary thing I picked, but that's the kind of thing you need to do to get there. And then no single family detached was included. I did include multifamily that satisfied this criteria, as well as employment lands, no public facilities though, no open space, just built lands, and since we actually removed something and put up something new. I didn't have the number on here, but it's about 5,900 additional units that could be realized in these zones. Of course, if you tear down multifamily and put up other multifamily, there's some net gain, but you might have a loss too, or a loss of jobs. So that's fun to do. And then finally, there's this concept of upzoning. This is where you would take an area that, you notice we had the 2 red values in that weird spreadsheet I had. They were in the density class 3, that middle category, and we didn't actually have, based on our targets and how we decided to put them into the neighborhoods and the density classes, we didn't have the capacity. We were about, I think that was around 3,150 short. I think that was the infill scenario. So anywhere in yellow, I went through and identified top quartile lands based on the initial characteristics weighting. And I said, okay, these lands are currently, there's a lot of vacant land inside that hexagon zoned in the moderate density suburban, the D2, the 2 to 7 units per dwelling unit, or per acre, sorry. So I said, well, we can upzone those to the D3 class, and we can get, whenever I turned it to D3, I used this assumption down here, 13 dwelling units per acre. And so basically all the vacant land in the yellow area, right, allowed us, when we upzoned it to 13 dwelling units per acre, to meet those deficits and to actually realize that density class 3 land. And so,
could you repeat that?
Yeah, so basically if you go back here, right there, this right here comes out to about 3,100 units that we just couldn't realize. We were already, you can see that we were grabbing units here. We had about 200 units, but it's in the existing neighborhoods. So probably could have grabbed those 200 units to solve that as far as an underutilized. But instead, we decided to upzone. And the reason to do that is that one of the things we've never done, that's sort of a neat option here, and again, this is not the future, these are simulations of the future, is to push ourselves a little bit, get out of the comfort zone and imagine what it would be like to change some areas and make them more housing diverse, right? And so the idea was that I went through and looked at, again, how they scored on the live, work, play composite, and also how many units they could give me so I could meet my targets quickly because it was late at night. But you could sort of choose more strategically around specific developments if you wanted to perform this upzoning. And that's what we're hoping to potentially get at as we finish these and then work towards the preferred alternative, working with staff, working with folks in the know of where are those areas, right, that are linked into infrastructure that might be zoned at a very low density, but in fact could really support a lot more density, and we'd get it close in and optimize the investments we've already made as a community in infrastructure. So it's just this neat concept that we've never done before, pushing ourselves to think outside what we've approved today. Again, it's a simulation.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Commissioner Fewens, on the vacant parcels piece of that,
Mm-hmm.
were you figuring in slopes?
Yep, slopes of 30% or greater than 30% are removed. Any area of a parcel that is strict constraint.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Of the 44,000 units that are predicted that we need,
Yeah.
does that include approved but not built?
The part of the vacant
or is that
capacity.
in addition to approved and not built?
That is, the 44,000 is based on the consensus forecast of population projection.
Right.
After 2038.
Okay.
So anywhere that you see it's purple, we have basically a version of approved unbuilt. There's some entitlement. It's either probably a planned unit development or maybe a tentative map, or sometimes both. And those are areas that, have already been planned and they haven't built yet. I actually went through with imagery, like in Damani Ranch. This whole chunk down here of this green area and the blue and this purple, they're all part of the PUD. But I went ahead and said, okay, if it's built, and it's a good chunk of land, that's a lot of 40-acre hexagons right there, that's an existing neighborhood, it exists. But this area is not built yet, but it's slated with a PUD. So it's just part of the vacant land capacity that we're gonna say, we think this many people are coming in the next 20 years, that means we need this many units. Where are we going to put them? So that's part of that capacity.
Okay.
Please, yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think your question might be, how do we count the capacity? What Jeremy's saying is when he goes through there, those purple hexagons do have capacity associated with them. And so then when he goes through and does the allocation, he grabs some of that capacity. 44,000 units comes from the demand side.
Right.
On the supply side, we've got capacity, and one of the capacities is from the tentative maps and the master plan. So it's the capacity there is not it's still hypothetical, but
It
it's
could change.
calculated based on the plans.
Yeah, it's based on the plans. And, often the plans are not final maps. And so what the Washoe County parcels might look like in that area that has a PUD might be big, blocky, chunky 80-acre thing, and there's a 40-acre chunk. But if we have a site map, a lot block plan from the tentative map or from the PUD, we georeference that in, and we digitize in the entire thing. And then if it's a single-family lot, we specify, and we digitize the roads in. So whenever we have information, we bring it in so that we're doing hopefully the best job of capturing what we've actually approved as a community in any given area. There's still areas that have a zoning. For example, this Mortensen-Garson area is large blobs zoned SF9. There's a lot of capacity out there. Whether or not it will actually be realized, I don't know. Sure. Got there, we did that. Redevelopment, cool. Upzoning, that was fun. Okay, and so then, right, all of this runs with Python code and the GIS. And so I actually was able to get all that to run and actually allocate out onto the landscape. And you can see here in green, there's certain evaluation metrics that I'm able to calculate right now. And then to the right in black are ones that we're still working on. But we can clearly say, how many units and how many acres were consumed or realized. That can be by the neighborhood types, by the quartiles, really by any geography we want, by the density classes obviously too, so we have an understanding of how many acres did it take to realize 4,000 units of density class 3 versus density class 2. Right? It takes more acres to get 4,000 units over 2 because it's lower density, and we have some of that to show. Over here, this came up tonight too. We're working on this. We're working on a way to standardize how we display or measure jobs housing balance so that we have something that, we can answer that question a lot better. These two really need to go through the transportation demand model, which is a process, to take it from what we got here into the TAZ format, get it to the RTC and run it. So we want to make sure we have everything baked in there to the way we want it before we send those through, but then we will get back things like the VMT per capita, hours of delay, or minutes of delay, and the air quality assessment for each scenario. So that's going to happen. School impacts, we've got measures of existing overcrowding by elementary school zones, middle school zones, high school zones. We're working on the list, I think, is what it comes down to, but these are the kinds of things we're after. But what I do have today are these two really cool ones, I think. We realized units by a given scenario, where does the wastewater go? Which treatment facility has to deal with it? Or we realized units in a certain way. There's differential hookup fee costs depending on where you build a home in this town. It's based on what it takes to provide infrastructure to one part of town versus another. If you're in the core of town, the hookup fee is zero, according to the data that I got from Tumwa. But at the edges of town, it could be as high as $12,000 or $13,000 to hook up per unit. So that's a big difference, and it's geographic.
Jeremy, why isn't there a line up there, a bullet point for stormwater runoff? That's as important as wastewater to 50% of this valley.
It is, and we've worked, I think I've presented to you guys previously about the stormwater situation with regards to the GIS data. It's about 65% of the way there. There's just a lot of gaps in the data, and it's not one that I certainly don't feel comfortable right now including it in there because, a lot of...
But it's going to affect your developable, undeveloped acreage right now that you've got colored hexagons out there for, and they may end up not being able to be developed because they may have to be retention facilities, so they're no longer, housing is going to be associated with those hexagons. So your housing numbers are going to drop. It could easily take away, 3 or 4 hexagons out of a given area that was purple in your diagram, and you know, maybe there's 200 acres that has to be developed as nothing but storm drain runoff retention.
I agree, and in areas that have like a planned unit development, my assumption, which may be very wrong, is that those things are factored into that lot block plan that we build in. So whenever we have that information, we're on top of that.
But it can't just be PUDs.
Well, exactly. And so
It
there's-
has to be undeveloped property that maybe the county owns or the city owns, and they have to say, it's never gonna be developed except as a detention or retention
I
facility,
personally,
not
I've
detention,
never seen
retention.
that data. I mean, I've looked through the stormwater data and I've gathered it from everybody I can, and it has some serious gaps. And so I don't know, potentially you could do something where we think we do have good data, because we did that study that showed that there was about 65% of the valley, of the TMSA rather, that we felt the data was probably commensurate with the level of development. So we could, in those areas, attempt to, add in a stormwater factor, but in the areas that are not well mapped, I don't have anything to go on.
Okay. I mean, not that I lose sleep over
Yeah.
stormwater runoff and retention and detention facilities, but I happened to fly into Las Vegas this morning,
Yeah.
and with the first time I've had a window seat in years, and you can see where the valley is moving and going to develop, and along with certain cut dirt roads, do you know that the first things that were finished that I saw out there today were drainage basins?
Yeah.
And drainage trenches going into cut areas that I have no idea how deep they are, but that's where these runoff troughs
Yeah.
headed to and stopped. So Clark County knows they have a problem.
And they're trying to
They're working
get
ahead
in front
of
of
it.
it. Yeah.
I think that's called planning. And then they don't have to react to it down the road. But look at all the acreage that was taken away. And as I'm sitting here listening to you tonight, it brought it all back to me, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, we're missing an element here.
Well,
Because some of that property is going to go away,
Some
and
of it
some of
will.
those houses aren't going to be available.
Some of it will go away. Luckily, we have almost 3 times the capacity that we need for our 20-year target. So we have a lot of additional capacity, so we can stand to lose some. And I will also say that we're involved in 3 initiatives that look specifically at stormwater. Number 1 is the stormwater mapping project we did with the WRWC that there's still rumors of a phase 2 where we'd actually try to fill in those data gaps. We're working with RCI through a grant they have from NDEP to look at source water protection areas. We're helping them with online mapping viewers and data analysis and data collection. And then finally, we were just recently awarded a grant to TMRPA from NDEP for $25,000 to start after this plan is adopted, and I shake my head. Right? Then we are going to we're going to look at non-point source pollution, which stormwater is a huge component of. So we're going to be helping RCI again, NDEP to, we're involved in trying to make that data better.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may. Kim Robinson for the record. One item, we're taking this presentation to the governing board tomorrow. And certainly one of the things that we can provide to the governing board is the fact that stormwater came up as a conversation. The fact that the data isn't entirely there for that right now is something that obviously we're trying to work on, but I think your points are well taken and something that we can share with the board members tomorrow.
Madam Chair, for the record, Chairman Moore, I understand your points, Commissioner, and what Jeremy is saying, yes, they're incomplete, and what you're saying is it might be, if they're incomplete, that may be fatal, but you didn't quite get that far. But here's why I think it's not as bad as it might be. First of all, I think Jeremy mentioned this, when he is doing the allocation, he is not allocating to 100% of the land. He's allocating to 80% of the land. There's another 20%, and we can't tell you where it is because it's a statistical thing.
Yeah.
That, so that could include a lot of land that might become drainage areas. And secondly, as you'll see when he gets to the next map, if you ever get there, Jeremy, a lot of what we're doing is, you know, it's impressionistic. I mean, you look back and you squint at it and you kind of go, what's going on? And so the details of exactly where that goes, if we're missing, you know, if we're off by, you know, dozens of acres in a given hexagon, it's this paradox that somehow you can be wrong on a lot of the details but make it up on average. And that's kind of how it's working out, which is, yeah, it might not be right here, it might not be right there, but that's going to offset that. And the big pattern that you get could be a little bit different, but I think you'll see that, you know, the patterns are instructive, and they're not, even if you were to say, well, there might be a couple hundred acres, you know, it wouldn't change those patterns much, but I'll leave it to Jeremy to get to that part.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Good point. But we are working on it, and I mean, there are other elements in here that are not included that are important as well. Public safety, you know, that's something that we've had, not really a hard time, but often data is just not available or not shared for several reasons. And so, you know, this is not a in fact, we've been trying to build this thing so we can continue to use it, right? That's why we scripted and automated everything so that as we, you know, continue to add data in and refine our understanding. So just to show you that I was able to calculate some metrics, there's 36 tables, right? Because we got 4 scenarios times 6 or 7 or 6, whatever it was, 8. As we evaluate, you know, how we're going to meet those goals that Terry showed, we're going to try to look at these metrics, like, for example, the wastewater units. Maybe those apply to more than one of those goal areas. Some of the way that we might have to evaluate these goals might be narrative. The goals are pretty broad. But to the degree that we can actually capture a measurement that can help us to differentiate, you know, superior to inferior kind of pattern, that's what we're after. And so I'm going to skip the exercise. Here's an example. So this is the classic scenario from the housing study. And in this case, it's kind of a double thing. I've got the hexagons as sort of the footprint of where these parcels are realized, and I've put these graduated symbols on there. The bigger the circle, the more units are being realized in that area. So you can get a feel for, you know, the chunky areas, right? So we're getting a lot. Evans Ranch is popping. You know, we built this scenario before Stonegate existed as an approved thing, so it's not in there. Down here, Optimani Ranch, right? Up in Spanish Springs. And then what we've got over on the right here is some of these metrics I'm talking about. So, you know, by neighborhood type, this allocation of 44,440 units, where did it go? Well, 51% of it went into this big developing areas chunk. And only 2% went into the employment zone that we had previously looked at. And that's because we didn't have those neighborhood zones back when we did these scenarios. So a little bit of that's bleeding over. We also have the total number of acres, again, by the neighborhood types, but I've also sliced it by the density classes. You can slice it by quartiles. You can slice it by really any geography. And so that's exactly what we did here with the water hookup fee cost. And so this is the burden that, in total, the 44,000 units would have to pay based on that differential structure of hookup fees. The further out you go, basically, the relationship is the more expensive it gets. So if you stay close in, you'll see that as we move forward. And then finally, here's the wastewater generation. We've got Cold Springs facility, Lemon Valley, Reno Stead, South Truckee Meadows, and Truckee Meadows. And these are in million gallons per day at year 20, right? So we're seeing that you can actually kind of compare across scenarios. Obviously, here's another one where it's different. So 4.41 to Tom Wharf in the classic scenario bumps up to 4.86 million gallons in the McCarran scenario. And so, you know, there are different impacts. If we build everything up in Stonegate, that's not going to go to Tom Wharf, and so it's not going to be reflected there. Obviously, there are, you know, issues at all of the wastewater treatment facilities. We have closed basins, we have limited treatment capacity, we have nitrogen stuff we talked about. So there are limits to this, and a graphic that I didn't get to make yet, but I will, is just going to be all 4 scenarios, you know, with some of those limits kind of also imposed on there, so we can get a feel for how these realizations of the future compare. But look at how the water hookup fee cost came down in the McCarran scenario just by moving 25% of the units into the McCarran ring, because again, the price to hook up in a big swath in the middle is 0. Not as much is being realized in developing areas, and there's a different sort of structure here is one of the new ones. This is the smart greenfield scenario. And you can see, wow, even more units going to Tom Wharf down here. But you can just kind of get a feel for the pattern. Where are things located? Where are they locating, right? Quite a bit still happening in the core, but obviously going on up here. I think this might be Stonegate. Yeah. Yep, that's the first time that really popped. And then finally, the infill scenario. So you can just kind of tell that it just sort of compressed in, right? It's definitely got a smaller footprint. I did this really nerdy thing where I put a convex hole around the hexagon realization. It's just silly, but this was the smallest one, so that was promising. And it really affects, Tom Wharf and these other, Cold Springs is getting nothing. There's nothing going on up here in this infill scenario. So again, these are not the futures that we're actually going to experience. They're just a way for us to imagine what the future will be like and then see how the impacts differ. And so we're working to solidify these. I think there's some tweaks we want to make with them. Obviously, we're going to want to finish out having that capacity to create those metrics. We need to add in the employment side. I've done employment, projections previously for the RTC in association with the consensus forecast. So we do have some information compiled already to pull that off. It's now just a matter of getting into this hexagon system. And then online tools. So, as I said, Damien has been working hard to figure out the circuitous path to get some of these tools online. So now we've sent out a spreadsheet, and we'll share that with you guys too. And you can weight that spreadsheet, go to the website, we'll include there's a password, and then you can imagine the future, what's important to you, and then run that. And then the idea is that hopefully we'll be able to collect all of these services that people run, and then that'll be more kind of information to help us to contextualize that preferred alternative that we're trying to create. So I'm probably going to go to sleep soon too. Right, so any other questions I'm happy to answer in Python code down there for you.
Any questions? Thank you.
Great, thank you for listening.
Great, everyone looks officially tired, so I'll make this quick. For the record, Lauren Knox with Regional Planning.
Here's your clicker.
All right, so now that we heard what Jeremy's presented to us, we really want to talk about implementation of that work. So staff and the consultant team have been working on evaluating and developing new policies for the regional plan update. At this point in time, we have some policy concepts that we want to share with this group. I want to point out that right now these are concepts. The details have not been fully hammered out, nor are they everything in the realm of policy that we're going to be coming up with soon. The next few slides really represent kind of the larger shifts in policy ideas from the current plan that we wanted to bring to you before we bring to the board tomorrow. All right, so the one policy concept we're working on is the idea of tiering within the TMSA as a way to prioritize growth. You saw in the work that Jeremy presented that we're working to identify areas where it's more appropriate to grow in the near term based on a variety of factors, including things like the availability of public infrastructure. Doing this can provide more certainty on where public services and infrastructure can direct growth and optimize public dollar usage. Basically, it effectively ties land use closer to facilities planning and capital improvements. Additionally, it's a way to discuss and implement the concurrency of growth in land use decisions with services and infrastructure provision. Through a variety of surveys, in some issues identification discussion, we have heard and recognized that there's really a strong voice right now by the public appointed and elected officials to have a stronger focus on natural resources within this plan. The current regional plan has a small section on natural resources, but we feel at this point in time it's really important that we look at how we can expand that and how we discuss the future of our natural environment within the region. We're currently actually developing a survey that's going to help us dig a little bit deeper into what it is that the public envisions and wants for our natural environment and natural resource usage. So stay tuned for that. That's coming out soon. We will bring that obviously back to this commission and to the governing board. And then we're really going to utilize this information in developing new policy relating to natural environment. we also have some process changes we are looking at. So for conformance reviews, we've heard from this body, as well as local government staff, that getting in on the process early would be really beneficial in adding value to project review. This really allows regional planning to take a more proactive role in the review. Ideally, it'll help provide information in regards to projects as it relates to the regional plan at the front end of the review process. And that can be utilized in part of the review process throughout the local government and then on up to regional planning. Additionally, we're looking at having 2 paths to determine conformance, one being a prescriptive path and the other being a more performance-based path. So you've heard us say this before, but we really want to take the opportunity that we have available to us right now in Nevada revised statutes to develop a regional annual report. So this will provide a path to determine how the region is collectively functioning against the goals, policies, and evaluative criteria that will be agreed upon within the regional plan. It allows the region to kind of shift and adjust and help us to reach the regional goals that we've prescribed, as you can see. Another idea, it's relatively tied to the regional annual report, is the idea of an annual awards program that can recognize actions taken to further implement the regional plan. This is voluntary by nature, it's not subject to our regulatory framework, but basically it's an additional layer in implementing the regional plan and working together on the construct of the adopted plan. All right, so just to recap, through this whole presentation, we've talked about goals, we've talked about scenarios, and now we've talked about some policy concepts. We're asking that you recommend the goals to the Regional Planning Governing Board. We're going to bring that to them tomorrow, as I said, and also provide any additional feedback. What we hear tonight is going to go to the board. We've definitely heard about stormwater, we've heard about housing. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up or ask, we would love to hear that at this point.
Questions? I do have just when you were talking about under the process changes and in terms of being proactive versus reactive, because in my tenure on the planning committee, well, with CABs and then planning commission and now here, often what I see happening is that developers come forward with a plan, and it's just, they're looking at a master plan amendment or, whatever they're coming under for review. But they put out all of this stuff that's very future looking, the number of units, and the public reacts to that. So I really respond to being proactive versus reactive and then because what we tell the public now is less than satisfying. Because we say, well, that'll come up when the tentative map is done, when this is all done. But they have to see this big picture, and then they ask the questions: impact on schools, impact on infrastructure. Where, we've heard tell forever, where is the public service and the public facilities to support this? And the elephant in the room, or the dozen elephants in the room right now, is the capacity isn't there. So looking at this is I hope, very promising.
Yeah, we're trying to tie our data and
Yes.
analytical work better into our conformance review process. We think we need to do that. We're at a place that we think we can. We've got a lot of good data work going on, so I hear you.
Because the sooner we can involve, when the public feels engaged, and if they can go in and play with this stuff at a very simple level, then they don't feel like it's a gotcha. And that improves the greater Truckee Meadows. So I'm off my soapbox.
Madam Chair, please. Kim Robinson for the record. 2 other items. We have an outstanding doodle poll, and this is for the regional plan update currently. We have a November 15th and 16th date identified potentially for a joint planning commission and governing board meeting. At this point, it looks like it would be on the 16th. There's a couple of you I still need to get together with, but you can release November 15th off your calendars if you've been holding that for us, and I appreciate that. We should have that nailed down relatively soon. The other item I wanted to address in terms of the regional plan update, one of the next steps is going to be taking these scenarios, the things that you've seen tonight, and actually taking those out for some feedback. from the public, both in terms of through MetroQuest surveys, and we also have a variety of focus group lunches that we're scheduling in about 3 weeks, I think, to gather more input and feedback information from folks to really be able to bring that to the joint meeting in November so that you have the opportunity to hear that as well. So I just wanted to make sure we touched on that.
Questions, comments? Okay, then, we do have the opportunity to put forth a motion.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner West.
Thank you. I move to recommend that the RPGB approve the goals for the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan as discussed, and also provide the following feedback in regards to the update. And the feedback is the discussions that have taken place tonight, Lauren, which you have just acknowledged in your presentation to us. And anything that any other commissioner at this time may add that was not discussed.
Commissioner Vanderwell, second.
Thank you. It's been moved by Commissioner Wesky and seconded by Commissioner Vanderbilt. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're now at reports. 7A, members and directors reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one item that we wanted to be able to share with you, and Damien is going to help me with that another process piece. We had previously talked about having all of the information that we have put together and various other documents, including the Reno Master Plan, Sparks, Washoe County, available for you in one location so that you can go to all that anytime you can't sleep or you just desire to be able to do some research on that. And so what we wanted to share with you is that we've created this portal. We will send you the link to be able to get to that in an email, but we just wanted to show you kind of what that looks like. We're also providing all of the materials that we have presented to the Planning Commission and the Governing Board. So if you ever have any questions that you want to go back to that, and we'll keep updating that. So that's hopefully for your reference.
And if I may add to that, David Kerwin for the record of regional planning. It's also password protected, because we don't want everyone to see all the things we're working on behind the scenes. We're going to share with all of you folks, and then as Kim said, we'll be updating and putting more information in kind of this section right here as we go through more information.
So we'll get that email out to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next meeting is November 14th for the commission.
That is correct. And we are looking at November 16th as a joint meeting. My hope is to have that nailed down by Monday of next week.
What time?
At this point in time, it looks like either 1 to 3 or 2 to 4.
Item B, legal counsel reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jessica Prenti for the record. I have no legal report.
Now to number 8, request for future agenda items. Seeing none, I'll move on to public comment. Do you have any requests for public comment? Moving on to number 10, written correspondence.
There is none.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, everyone.